Hey guys! Welcome to Social Studies with Ms. Rogers World History Edition. Today we're resuming our journey with Europe, and we'll go back a little bit to where we left off with the fall of Rome. This event was truly massive in the way it impacted people's day-to-day lives, so we're going to see how Europe initially moved on from such a colossal event, and the new society that will be created as a result. So, let's get started. Before we bring back our timeline and really get into what's going on, I want to kind of review a bit and set the stage, because it's been a minute since we talked about the fall of Rome. You already know this time period is called the Middle Ages because I've said it a billion times when talking about both Africa and Asia. I just find it weird that the Middle Ages is typically described as being super bleak and dark, but most places around the world are having a massive golden age. Other names for the Middle Ages include the Dark Ages, the Age of Faith, the Age of Feudalism, the Medieval Era, and I don't know if it would be fair to say one of these names fits everywhere in the world. I guess that's kind of the real question though, isn't it? What's the best name for this time period? When we learned about the fall of Rome, we saw 4 factors that made Rome weak over time. They were political factors, social factors, economic factors, and military factors. All 4 of these factors weakened the Roman Empire, or at least the western half of the Roman Empire, because the eastern half, to be honest, was doing a lot better than the western half. The straw that broke the camel's back with the Western Roman Empire was the invasion of the Germanic tribes. Remember, the Huns came from northeastern Asia, and they were looking to pillage and loot whatever village they could find. And the Germanic tribes settled throughout Europe and Asia were traveling southwest to get away from these Huns. Many of these tribes sought refuge in the Roman Empire, and many of them were given that refuge. There of course were Germanic tribes who were grateful for this protection, but there were others who did take advantage of it and literally tore down the Western Roman Empire from the inside. When you're invading an area, you want to target the big cities. That's the smart thing to do. So people were abandoning cities and running to more rural areas to get away from all of the violence. The invasions also disrupted trade, meaning the economy collapsed completely. The Roman officials either ran or were killed, so there was also no more centralized government. Everyone just kind of dispersed as Romans and Germanic tribes kind of meshed together and made new societies under these Germanic kings who took over the areas. The merging of these people did 2 big things. One, it disrupted the idea of learning. Many Germanic tribes, just like African societies, used storytelling as a means of passing down history and culture. And for many, there was no reading or writing. So the idea of education was very different, and today we consider this time period a major lack in traditional education. We also see new languages emerging. The Western Empire spoke mostly Latin, but the Germanic tribes had their own languages, so as people merged together, so did their culture and their languages. So the Latin from the Romans mixed with the language of whatever Germanic tribe they meshed with, and that is how modern Romance languages like Italian and French and Spanish were created. Those were the results. And after the Western Roman Empire fell, this is what Europe looked like. Over here, we still have the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and over here, we have all of these new Germanic kingdoms that will actually start to look a lot like modern-day countries. One more thing I want to touch on before we move on and bring back our timeline. When we learned about the Roman Empire, we saw the presence of Christianity growing, and eventually it would be declared the dominant religion in the empire. Obviously, because there are 2 halves of the empire, each half has their own big main church. I also want to pause and emphasize right now that when we say Christianity, there's only one type at this point in history: Catholicism. We don't have Baptists or Methodists or Presbyterians or anything like that yet. We only have Catholics right now. During our class on Christianity, we mentioned how Peter was seen as the first bishop of Rome. And that title, Bishop of Rome, would be given to those seen as Peter's successors, and they eventually would be known as popes. The Pope was seen as the head of the big church in the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire also had a main church, and their head of religion was a patriarch who was appointed by their emperor. So the emperor really had full control. We'll get more into Eastern Roman Empire Christianity in a second. As Europe fell into absolute shambles, the presence of the church became a lot stronger. The world is pretty much comprised of leaders and followers, and one isn't better than the other, it's just characteristic tendencies. But there definitely are a lot more followers in the world than true leaders, and followers need someone to lead. So when the Western Roman Empire falls and everything is a mess, the church stands as a symbol of both normalcy and leadership. People in Europe are looking towards the church to lead them to what is next, and the church is really going to grow accustomed to being such a powerful role in society, which will lead to its own issues, even between the Christian church still hanging on in Rome and the one in the Eastern Roman Empire. Now we're going to bring back our timeline and start with the Eastern Roman Empire, because we need to figure out what the heck was going on with them when the Western Empire fell. In history, the Eastern Roman Empire is typically referred to as the Byzantine Empire, but the name Byzantine is more of a modern name. People living in this empire didn't see themselves as Byzantines, they saw themselves as Roman and of the last little bit of the Roman Empire. When Emperor Justinian came to power in the Eastern Empire, his biggest goal was to re-establish the Roman Empire through both laws and territory, and he would do that. For a short while. Fun fact, Justinian's wife fought to expand the rights of women through property ownership and the idea that women who cheat on their husbands should not be executed and other things that women lacked rights in. Unfortunately for the Byzantines, all of this land gained by Justinian was shortly after conquered by the Islamic Umayyad Empire. Just like most areas around the world, the Islamic world was having a golden age during this time period. And that's something we could have already assumed when we saw how quickly and how far Islam spread across the African continent. As time went on and both the church in Rome and the church in Constantinople grew, the two churches had differing opinions on leadership. The Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, declared that they were the supreme ruler of all Christianity. And the Patriarch in Constantinople did not agree with that. The Patriarch saw he and the Pope as two sides of the same coin. He thought that they were equals, but the Pope disagreed. The Pope said that the Roman Church itself was founded by Peter, therefore it clearly made it the superior church and him the superior Christian leader. This fragmented the Christians of Europe and officially created the first schism, or the first divide, in the Christian church. And now we have two forms of Christianity. We now have the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And this event was known as the East-West Schism. We already talked about how the Western Roman Empire fell and was taken over by numerous Germanic kingdoms. And I want to take a closer look at some of those kingdoms, one example being the Franks. The Frankish kingdom was started by a guy named Clovis, and Clovis was actually the first Germanic king to convert to Christianity. Obviously, he's on this side of Europe, meaning he falls under the Roman Catholic Church jurisdiction. Originally, Clovis was very against Christianity, though his Christian wife continuously begged him to convert. During a battle with another Germanic tribe, Clovis was very close to losing. It's said that he looked up to the sky and cried out, "Jesus Christ! If you shall grant me victory, I will believe in you!" And apparently soon after that, the enemy started retreating, so then he was like, "All right, bring in the priest, let's do this baptism thing." Clovis and the Roman Catholic Church found allies in each other. The church had the ears of much of Europe, and lots of money, whereas Clovis was a powerful king, and he could provide protection. This started a beneficial relationship between the church and the kings who shared the faith. Obviously, as we know, Clovis cannot live forever, and the same old, once he's gone, his empire is split between his sons, exact same thing every time, and his kids are not the same rulers as him, so ownership of the throne changes, and it's still the Frankish kingdom, just under a different family. We will tell this exact same story 100 times this class, but this particular passive ownership was actually a really great thing, because without it, we wouldn't have had Charlemagne. Charlemagne makes the Frankish kingdom go from this to this, which is great for them. As the Frankish kingdom grows, so does the Islamic Empire. We already saw with the Byzantines how the Islamic Empire is really growing in the Middle East, in Africa, even in Western Europe, and the Pope starts to get a little bit nervous. Who's going to protect me? Clovis is long dead. Who's going to be my friend?
Me, I'll be his friend.
No, you won't, Avery. Get back to the dungeon.
Oh, man.
And Charlemagne decides to take that job. See, Charlemagne is a huge advocate of education, which this time period desperately needs, and Christianity. Charlemagne's empire is actually said to have had its own little renaissance, its own rebirth of education. On top of that, Charlemagne is considered to be a protector of both Christianity and the Pope. In exchange for this, the Pope crowned Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor. And what that means is that the church is pretty much calling Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, the heir to the greatness that was the Roman Empire. Which, is great, except the Byzantine Empire is literally still the Roman Empire, but it's fine. And as you can see on our timeline, this happened before the East-West Schism, and it's this kind of insult that was one of the tension-driving factors that helped to lead to this East-West Schism. Just insult after insult from the Pope that would eventually lead to that split. And of course, same story, Charlemagne will die and the empire will be split up, same old. But when Charlemagne dies, parts of the empire starts getting attacked and invaded by other Germanic tribes, like the Vikings. And who's supposed to save the people from the Norse gods like Thor and Loki and Odin? There's like a vacuum of leadership in Europe, and the result of this situation is a new social and political structure called feudalism. The feudal system is based off of loyalty, and it can be visualized in this pyramid-like figure. At the top, you have your kings. Kings would rule over a kingdom, and they would acknowledge that ruling over this land is easier when you have people to help you in smaller local areas. So kings would go to anyone he might owe, whether someone helped him conquer the land or overthrow the previous king, anyone who could have helped him in any way, and he would pay them in a fief, which is land. And the lord of this land would be loyal to said king and help them rule in particular areas and help defend it and all that jazz, pretty much just be loyal to him. A vassal is someone who received a fief of land. So a lord would be a vassal of the king, and a knight could be a vassal to a lord, if a lord chooses to give their knight land. The knight's job is obviously protection. The knight stays loyal to the lord and protects them, and the lord can give them land, can give them excess crops and foods from their manor's farms, but through loyalty, they take care of each other. The bottom of the food chain in the feudal system are peasants and serfs, but really serfs are the bottom. See, a lord lives on a manor where they will have serfs, pretty much servants tied to the land, like they can never leave, they work there for life. In exchange for living on the lord's land, they work the farms and the fields and basically are subjected to the whim of the lord, who provides the land. And the serfs end up feeding the lords and also the knights, who provide the protection. And you see where I'm going with this. It's a big circle, and they all need each other in this system based off of loyalty. And again, they create this system because they need this system. There's no more emperor. There's no more centralized government in Europe. And as we see the feudal system grow, you'll see three groups of people constantly fighting for power. And that's the nobles, the monarchs, and the church. And let me tell you how this fight for power works. Think of it like a school. Your teacher is your lord. You see your teacher every day. You have a personal relationship with them. They for sure know you and they know your name. You may or may not like your teacher, and a serf may or may not like their lord, but they have a direct relationship with them. The teacher, or the lord, can directly influence people every day. The monarch is the equivalent of the principal. You know their name, you know their face, but have you ever talked to them? More than once or twice? Do they know your name? You know they're supposed to be in charge, and yeah, they have rules and you follow them, or at least you're supposed to, but you don't have a direct relationship with them, just like the serfs would never have a direct relationship with a king. And then you have the church, like you have your school system. It's a group, an entity, and you may or may not know anyone involved in this group, but you know they're super important. You know they're in charge, but you'll never meet anyone in charge at the county, just like anyone low on the food chain in the feudal system would never meet anyone from the church. I mean, can you even put a face to the county? Can the serfs put a face to the church? Just like teachers, principals in the county fight over control in the classrooms, these groups of people are fighting for power. When you need something at school, who do you go to? Your teacher. But who really has the power to do something? An example of this balance of power struggle would be the Magna Carta. There was an English King John who was honestly terrible. He was so cruel to his subjects and tried to squeeze money out of them whenever he could. He alienated the church and raised taxes to an all-time high just to finance the wars he wanted to fight to conquer new territory. Obviously, his nobles decided he was reaching for far too much power and needed to be checked. So the nobles forced him to sign the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. The Magna Carta was a document of rights that acknowledged that the relationship between a king and his vassals was based off of mutual rights and obligations. And this meant he could not just walk all over them. They had certain rights he couldn't infringe on, and he also had certain obligations to them. This is single-handedly the most important document in English history. The most intact version of the Magna Carta sits in the Salisbury Cathedral in England today. The Magna Carta was a huge victory for noble power. Another example of the struggle of power would be another great schism. And this might take a second to get through. I would make this a story time, but I want you to be able to get the notes down. The church eventually told the kings that they had supreme authority over them, and in 1305, Philip IV, King of France, decided enough was enough. He asserted his authority over the bishops in France, and Pope Boniface VIII, the current pope, told Philip he was not allowed to do that. He presented Philip with a document declaring that all kings must obey the church, especially the pope. Philip sneered at this document. In fact, one of his ministers is said to have remarked, "My master's sword is made of steel, the Pope's is merely made of words." In response to the Pope's demand, Philip decided to kidnap the Pope and hold him prisoner. He was planning to put the Pope on trial in France, and the Pope was rescued by church military, but a precedent was set. Even worse, Pope Boniface died shortly after his rescue, and it's speculated that Philip poisoned him. Philip persuaded the College of Cardinals, who elect the Pope, to choose a French archbishop to be the next Pope, Clement V. Clement moved the capital of the church from Rome to Avignon in France, and this badly weakened the church. People were so mad. You can't just move the house of God. And when reformers tried to move the capital back to Rome, it just made it worse. Time came for the cardinals to choose a new pope, and they really could hear people screaming outside their door, "A Roman! A Roman! We want a Roman! Or at least an Italian." The local people really wanted a local pope who would favor their land, that they saw as the chosen land. The cardinals announced that an Italian pope had been chosen, Pope Urban VI, and they regretted their choice almost instantly. Pope Urban immediately started condemning the cardinals for their luxurious lifestyle, for accepting gifts and money and fancy things in return for favors for their country. Pope Urban accused them of being corrupt, and in response, the cardinals attempted to overthrow him by electing a new pope, a French guy, Clement VII. Now there are two popes, each declaring that the other is not only an imposter, but the Antichrist, and that they deserve to be revolted against because it's a false pope. Urban lived in Rome, and Clement lived in France, and this would start a split in the church known as the Great Schism, or the Division, in this really divided Europe. The Council of Constance attempted to end the Great Schism by picking another pope. Now there are 3 popes. Are there not enough popes in Europe? We have the Avignon Pope, the Roman Pope, and this third pope was elected by a council at Pisa. Now there's 3. Okay. With the help of the Holy Roman Emperor, the council forced all 3 popes to resign. Then the council chose one final new pope, Martin V, which ended the Great Schism, but it was a pretty laughable event and left the church pretty weakened. It was bad. And we're going to continue looking at questionable actions by popes and kings and nobles alike tomorrow. So I'll see you guys then as we continue on with this interesting Middle Ages journey.